podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, welcome to the Vantage Point 3 webinar, Demystifying Spiritual Mentoring. I'm Brent Eliason, and I'm kind of just the host here. You didn't sign on to hear me talk much. You signed on to hear Randy and Rob. So Rob and I are in Sioux Falls in Rob's office, and Randy is joining us from the Chicago area. Pam Edwards was originally scheduled to be with us, but due to a scheduling snafu, she's unable to be with us today. But so it's the first webinar of the season. We could call it opening night in VP3 webinar world. And so we just want to welcome you and say we are excited that you're here. And I'm actually excited to be a part of this and learn some more from Randy and Rob. So if you'll notice on the webinar screen, if you've done one of these before, or if you haven't done one of these before, somewhere on your screen you have that control panel, and there's a spot for questions. So if something pops into your head during the course of the webinar and you want to ask a question, go ahead and type those in, and we'll be scanning over those, and at the end hopefully we'll have time to hit a few of those, and if a few of them fit in as we're talking about some things, we may even incorporate those questions right within what we're talking about. So once again, I want to welcome you to Demystifying Spiritual Mentoring. Once again, my name is Brent Eliason. I started working with Vantage Point 3 here in half-time capacity and promotion and recruitment this past July. I'm in my third year of facilitating journey groups, and yeah, so that's who I am. You can see me on there, I guess. So Randy, you're up.
Yeah, good to be with you all. Always good to see as many Canadians as possible to one of these. You know, it just adds a certain beauty to the whole thing. So welcome one and all. It's a pleasure for us to do this for you. As if you've been a part of our webinars before, you know that we are prone to say we would much rather do this in person over a couple of pots of coffee, but this will do for a Tuesday evening. So I'm president of Vantage Point 3, and first learned about the language of spiritual mentoring actually from my good brother Rob when I was studying at Fuller, and as he heard me talk about things that I wanted to put my hand to in my doctoral program, he said, you know, you ought to read this article by a guy named James Houston on spiritual mentoring. And when I read it, it just resonated with what I cared deeply about in my heart. And hopefully that as we sink into this evening, that will come out.
Good to hear your voice, brother from Chicago.
Yeah.
My name's Rob, and I am also here in Sioux Falls with Brent, and I work in the area of education, and so that is for VP3. And I think tonight I've been really looking forward to this in many ways, simply because whether I called it spiritual mentoring or not, it has been such a fundamental part of my own development from high school on, and maybe even before that, people walking alongside me. And sometimes it's just such a clear recognition of God's grace at very critical moments in high school and college, and time in my 20s, and now even in the from late 30s into the 40s now, some significant people have walked alongside me, and I've caught some significant things because of their attention. So looking forward to this conversation, and it's good to see some of the names out there of folks we know. So let's walk through a little bit, express what in the world have we been thinking about. And this has been a kind of a growing concern for us over the past, 16 months in particular, that brings us to this webinar, but also brings us to, we developed a new mentoring guide called Walking Alongside Others. They kind of emerged in a similar way. And we put it down here, the sorts of people we are thinking about as we talk tonight. They're not the only things we're concerned about, but particularly tonight and as we developed the mentoring guide, Walking Alongside Others, these folks came to mind. One, it's folks for whom they've been invited, whether through the Vantage Point 3 processes or somewhere in the life of their church, to be a spiritual mentor. And they're simply hesitant or unsure of what to do. The word could even be intimidated at times. That somehow this is often folks that have been maturing for a while in their faith, but they perceive that they're not able to play this role, and there's a lack of confidence. And we've been thinking a lot about those folks and wondering whether one of the central reasons is perhaps they place just too high of an expectation upon what this spiritual mentor does or is supposed to produce, and perhaps overcomplicates it. So that's one of the folks we're thinking about that you may identify with or walk near someone that's like that. The other folks we're thinking about is the ones that are convinced they've bought in to the importance of walking alongside others, and they're simply wanting guidance in how to do it well or better. And also what's a part of that, as we hear, is they would love for others in their church community to perhaps recognize that this isn't quite as scary a concept, or and I don't know, sometimes the image in my head is, do we think we might have to be Yoda in order to play this role? And I'm into Yoda, but I'm not sure that's exactly what we need to be shooting for here. That play Yoda. So that's my secret concern at the bottom of this. That we can understand that perhaps being asked to be a mentor or a spiritual friend is not the same thing as being a Jedi warrior and being invited into that. So anyhow, you'll notice some of the images that we are putting in here. Before, Brent, I'll have you jump in here. But one of the stories, and perhaps it's a competing image in my mind with, for many people, this Yoda, Luke Skywalker image of what it means to be a spiritual friend or mentor, is one of the mentors in my life, a man named Norman. The way he often thinks about his role as a spiritual mentor is he places himself in the story of Luke 24 on the road to Emmaus. And it's on that road that those two disciples, if you recall, as they walk after the events of Easter weekend, they are kind of getting to the bottom of all the things that have happened, including the fact that some have reported that this Jesus is still alive, who's been crucified. And along the way, this stranger comes that they do not recognize, and it's Jesus. And he walks with them. And by the end of the evening, they recognize him. And for Norman, he says that when we walk as spiritual mentors and friends, we walk as one of the disciples on the road, knowing that sometimes we recognize Jesus and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we recognize him and sometimes we don't. But we are not being called to be Jesus in each other's lives in that regard, but more to be friends that share along the way. So these images, this one here is a Rembrandt sketch of the road to Emmaus, and one earlier was by an Irish artist on the road to Emmaus. So it's a good image for us to be thinking about as one of those disciples and those that we walk with.
I really, I appreciate that perspective, because that immediately, I think, takes some of the pressure off. But as you can see on the screen, the structure of the webinar tonight, just kind of going, this is our outline, our overview, and we hope, as you can see the fifth bullet down there, we hope to get to some questions that you might be posting throughout the webinar. And hopefully the last 10-15 minutes we'll have some time to discuss those. But we'll start off by defining, okay, what is spiritual mentoring? What do we mean by that? And then going into the next few, spiritual mentoring, what is required? What do you need to do, or what do you need to be as a spiritual mentor? And then third topic we'll be covering is maybe some misconceptions, what spiritual mentoring is not. Then we have a few questions 4 questions that we have come up with, kind of a combination of some different things that people have brought up during the preparation of this. And then we hope to have some time for some questions and some answers. So Randy is going to give us a good definition of what spiritual mentoring is.
So you see the definition there, and what we're going to do is just read through that, and then I'll make a few
Just to let
comments
you
on
know,
it.
that's me with the technical difficulties there. If you think your screen's blinking all over the place, you can thank Rob. So I think
Hey,
I'm done now.
Rob, it's kind of hard to read that when it keeps like going to a different
Is that
screen.
right?
I don't know if you know that. So spiritual mentoring is a relationship between 2 or more people and the Holy Spirit, where the people can discover through the already present action of God 3 things: intimacy with God, or the question, a great question that tags with that is, who is God? Second, identity as a beloved child of God or beloved children of God. Who am I? And then third is this notion of kingdom responsibility, or maybe another I word for that could be incarnation. What am I to do with my life? And just a few comments on some of those words. It's good news for us to know that when we enter this kind of mentoring relationship, that the Holy Spirit goes before us, much like the painting on the road to Emmaus, that there's a work that the Spirit is up to already before we show up. And as Peterson says, that we show up and discover there's something there for us to do, God is already at work. And those who provide it, or those who just seem to be the real deal spiritual mentors, it's like they know that God's Spirit is at work. And they just assume that that is happening uh, amidst the good company that they're keeping. So a couple who comes to mind in my journey are Connie and Alvin Bone. They were in their early 70s when I had met them, just after Jesus got a hold of my life. And when we would meet together, it was like God showed up in the room. And they would sometimes say, you know, God is with us. And now, a few years past my meeting them and thinking more about spiritual mentoring, they really believe that. And there's such tremendous good news for us to know that we're not the ones who are carrying the lion's share of what to do, that that's the Spirit's job. And when we can kind of keep that in check or in perspective, then these 3 things that seem to surface in amidst that relationship seem to just kind of flow out of it. So there's typically a bigger sense of God's love. I remember sitting in Connie and Alvin's living room and we'd be talking, and I just, from time to time, would have this just larger sense of God's love for me. I would typically be reminded of who I really was in their good company, and then I always left their place knowing there was something significant for me to put my hand to, not having a clue what that was, but there was something there that the Spirit had kind of just kind of tossed my way, that over time would be revealed. But those 3 things became apparent as I spent good company with Connie and Alvin Bone, and they had assumed that God was in the room with us, and I just think that's just very true, and a helpful way to understand what spiritual mentoring is.
Yeah,
Brent?
and those 3 questions too, it comes to my mind too, is they're not those, who is God, who am I, and what am I to do with my life, or what does God desire to do through my life? Those are not like fill in the blank sorts of questions as we put them on the page. I mean, they are ones that we'll be growing into. Norman, that gentleman I was speaking of, I mean, it feels like he's growing into them right now as a 85-year-old, wondering what today he might learn more about intimacy and identity and what his kingdom responsibility is. So that's a horizon for us to remember. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Well, thank you. So hopefully that gives you a good definition as we try to get to the next. Oh, there's Rob again.
I got difficulties.
He's got an itchy trigger finger is what he's got.
There you go.
So as we look at spiritual mentoring, what is required, and in this, what is required of a spiritual mentor? What do you need to be a spiritual mentor? And the other thing to be aware of is, we can look at this from both perspectives. Not only is this a how to be a spiritual mentor, but this might also be something, as the person who is seeking a mentor. These are maybe some of the things, some of the qualities that you might want to look for in someone who might be your mentor. So spiritual mentoring, what is required? Rob?
Yeah, let me start with that. The first one is, and a few of these are just the language of them are coming from a guy named Thomas Hart, The Art of Christian Listening. But I just liked his language on this. But what it is, or what is required, is fundamentally it's the work of being a companion. We're not being asked to be a teacher or a counselor, a biblical scholar. Perhaps some of us have those skills and these would be helpful in this situation. But in general, it's to be a companion. They're men and women who are simply with us on the journey. And so much of what the gospel is about this with God, with us life. And the way in which we communicate the gospel is incarnational, to be with others as well. And so companion actually literally means to one who share bread, or to break bread and with somebody. And so it's a sharing of life. And that may be someone that is somewhere down the road from us, more mature, maybe more of a peer. But in either case, the work that we're being invited to is that of being a companion to others. As some would call it, a spiritual accompaniment. Um, and so I think that's a helpful, maybe corrective to some of our thoughts. And it applies across. Some of us are concerned about things like language of spiritual direction versus mentoring versus friendship. And there's a transferability. All of those relationships have a bit of a spiritual companionship to them. And it's where we give full attention to what God is doing in our lives. And sometimes that is the two people that walk together are giving full attention to the mentoree's life, or the directee's life. Other times, in more of a friendship peer, they're giving full attention, both of them, to what God's doing in their life. And so it is this willingness. Am I willing to be a companion? And so, Randy, why don't you jump on to the
Yeah.
kind of
I
the
would
next
just
one?
I would just add to the whole companion requirement that for us to trust our heart's desire and simply wanting to be a friend.
Mm-hmm.
I know that might sound just overly simple, but I don't know if you all have this, but when you're meeting with somebody and you just find yourself just at the heart of it, just wanting to be their friend. And well, can you do that? Because can you maintain objectivity and all that? I don't know. Maybe we think too much about that. And uh, can we trust our heart that we could be a good friend to this person who is before us? And I think that's very helpful to the spirit. That if we have that posture of wanting to be that person's friend, I think somehow we get a little more dialed in to what the spirit might be up to in that person's life. It's like we can hear things, which leads to
Yeah.
our next concern. Is there a willingness to listen? Henry Nouwen has a great book out called Here and Now, and when I read that, it helped me realize the importance of simply being here and now. And when I feel the temptation to be distracted, that's a real prayer that I prayed today as I met with somebody that I was meeting with. My mind was all over the place and I wasn't fully present. And I know that I wasn't truly listening to them. So I prayed, Lord, help me to be fully present here and now. And I think that's important in this art of listening to the person who's before us. Sometimes, and for each of us is different, but I think it's helpful for us to pay attention to our environment. And so what environments help us be better listeners to the people before us? And so I know for me, if I'm meeting with somebody in a spiritual mentoring relationship, I will be very careful to say, let's meet here instead of other options that we could have been tossing around with where to meet. So know what environments will help you be fully here and now.
So,
Uh,
Randy, which ones do you pick there? What type of environments, like you were saying?
for me, I need a place of quiet. Sometimes, I mean, as much as I love meeting in a coffee shop, sometimes that is the worst place
Hmm.
uh, for the kind of listening that I know I need to provide for the person before me. So sometimes it's in my office, sometimes it's for a walk
Yeah,
where I find I'm more tuned in to what they may be saying. So it doesn't always have to be physically sitting somewhere, but can it be out in a beautiful chunk of nature that can help me to listen?
yeah,
But I think the point is, whatever we know our distractions can be, can we pull away from those distractions in order to create a bit more of a hospitable environment for the person before us?
yeah. Good.
The other couple other things I would add uh, is the importance of being aware of your own body language. That
Hmm.
sometimes we realize that we're fidgety or we're sitting with our arms crossed, and although we might not intend it, it can communicate
Yeah,
something a little off-putting to the other. Uh, you will listen better, I think, if you notice the other person's body language and what might that be a cue for that might be going on with them. I would encourage what I call a listening openly, uh, and this requires prayer as well, to listen without having too many filters or too many preconceived ideas or judgments or answers that we would quickly jump to. Can we, as
yeah,
one person says, can we hold things in suspension a little bit while we're listening? Uh, I would also encourage us to, this is funny how this works, listen for what comes out first in the conversation.
hmm,
And I know oftentimes when I'm meeting with my spiritual mentor, sometimes it's what he shares first or what I will share first that tends to be the nugget of our conversation an hour later, so to speak.
hmm.
And that it might sound corny, but I've just been taking note. Where does the conversation start and where does it end? And oftentimes it's the same place.
Huh.
Uh, and above all, listen prayerfully. And that's kind of the answer that gets the gold star. But as you're listening, are you are you actively praying, not just for the person before you, but praying that the Spirit does what the Spirit needs to do, and praying for yourself? I'm often, it seems like I'm praying more for myself. Lord, help me to be fully present with this person and hear what you want me to hear. So those would be uh, some things that are just helpful for us to pay attention to in terms of uh, what's required of us in this type of mentoring
Hmm.
is not just companionship or friendship, but how do we be a good listener? And then third, uh, how do we ask questions?
Yeah,
And uh, assuming that there's good listening taking place and good praying while we're listening, to trust the questions that come to mind. And before I fully trust the questions that come to mind, here's a little prayerful game I play, which I don't know if you can put those words together, but I just did. A prayerful game of discernment. So, Lord, show me a red light, green light, if this question is a right question to ask. And I know many of you have been in this spot where the conversation gets to a point and you know if I ask question A, the conversation can go a very different direction than if I ask question B. And so how do you pray in those moments to trust what question gets the green light to go for it? Uh, I,
hmm.
I would encourage us to think about how do we learn the art of asking open-ended questions and asking questions that don't put the other person on the defensive or maybe cause them to be anxious, uh, but almost to pretend you're a bit of a spy or a detective and you're asking questions that will help the person feel very comfortable and very willing to share more information with you. for some of us, that's an awfully tough thing. What has helped me, so some people say, Randy, you ask these amazing questions. How did you learn to do that? One of the ways that I learned to do that, when I think I have a very insightful thought to give, I've learned the discipline of stopping myself and spinning that insight into a question. So, and there are times when, you all know this, you have the right answer and you're just ready to just toss that on the table. You will help the other person discover, and something will sink a little more deeply if you can spin your thought into a question and ask them what they think about the matter at hand. And also with asking questions, sometimes we think spiritual mentoring is just a matter of listening and asking questions, but we never really give advice. There's a very timely place for us to offer advice that comes to mind. So trust yourself in those moments, that if you have something that's, would be so very helpful to this person, it's okay to bring that to the conversation. So on my drive to Chicago, I stopped and talked to a person on the phone, and I just felt my heart beating. I knew that was a cue. I needed to let this guy know what I thought. And I let him know what I thought. It wasn't in a demeaning way by any means. It was very helpful and constructive to stretch his thinking about a decision that he was facing. So a willingness to ask questions is very much required. How we do that requires a bit of an artistry.
Yeah, and I think there's people that ask good questions, and Randy's certainly one of those that has done that in my life. I think of my Uncle Paul, sheet metal worker in Philadelphia suburbs. Is just a great question asker. And what I've begun to, we got, in our mentoring guides and in some of our manuals and books, got lists of questions. At the core, and they can be helpful for sure, but at the core, I become to trust that there's a deep care that comes from people that ask good questions, that they reflect the person's capacity to really care for the person across the table from them. And so there's no one size magic question. There's going to be ones that we kind of like, that we go to, but at the core of so much of this care is simply the question, what are you going through on the journey? And I'm here to listen and do more than listen, but so many different versions of our questions are helping people unpack. And it's amazing how few people actually get asked that question throughout their daily lives. And
Right.
maybe we'll hit that a little bit more. I know for me, I'm always the advice thing. I don't know if we'll hit that in a couple minutes, but that's their question. Because I'm right. This is where Randy and I we lean a little bit differently. So that was his first jab at me. So let me jump. Oh, go ahead, Brent.
Well, the one thing I was going to add was I really liked how Randy said, rather than giving insight, asking the right questions. I was a teacher for 15 years, and the biggest challenge, understanding how people really learn to apply things. It's people pick up very little from what you tell them, but what you can help them discover on their own is what they truly learn from. And so I just thought that was great insight on Randy's part, to turn that great insight into a question and help the person discover it for themselves, because it's going to have significantly more meaning if I feel as though it comes from within myself, then even if Jedi Rob or Randy give me the information, it's so much more empowering if it comes from within myself. And so I just thought that was a great word from Randy.
Yeah. Let me hit the last two kind of, in addition to a willingness to be a companion, a willingness to listen, a willingness to ask questions. This is one of the hardest things in all of life, is a willingness to be oneself, to not wear a mask, to not compare oneself, to teeter. I think sometimes we teeter back and forth in comparison between, on one hand, poor me, I wish I was more like that person, or on the other hand, thank God I'm not like that person. And we never kind of have the courage to go and where God's inviting us, that to be ourselves. He's created us uniquely, and obviously that's in relationship to Him. And so, a willingness to be oneself points out we're not. No, we're not professionals. This role of being a spiritual mentor or friend, we're not trying to be experts in this whole thing. In many ways, this, like the rest of the Christian life, is the work of amateurs. And we don't professionalize spiritual friendship and spiritual mentorship. Now, there's wisdom, don't get me wrong, and guidance. I don't mean that there's not things that one can learn. But I think we have a tendency to professionalize some of these things, and so we hide behind some of these masks. And so when someone shares something, allow ourselves to be affected by that, and to not feel like we have to play a certain role or to pretend. Certainly, we exhaust ourselves in pretending to be something we're not. That's certainly a recipe for burnout. So, I mean, that's a big deal that we could probably spend a fair amount of time talking about. I think the question for a lot of us is, what is keeping us from being ourselves, being comfortable in our own skin, and which hits the final one for our kind of talk is the final requirement is this willingness to love, and um, it cuts to the chase of so much of what we talk about in Christian discipleship. None of this is a tip and technique, fundamentally sort of thing. It comes from a willingness to love, and so you hear the Apostle Paul's words in First Corinthians echoing through everything we do as mentors and friends. I can do miracles. I can have all sorts of insight. I can speak in such discerning languages, but if I have not love, I'm nothing. I have nothing. I'm a clanging gong, which is many times I've left a coffee shop feeling a bit like that. And M. Scott Peck, I think, gives sometimes a fair definition to kind of work from. It's this willingness. Love is a will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing another spiritual growth. That it don't get wrong in any of this. In some ways, we're trying to this is a very demanding role. We're trying, though, to, I think sometimes we think we need to be the experts and we need to be the professionals or the Yodas. And so we're trying to relax on that. But there is it's to walk with another person is going to involve me stepping outside of my own orbit, so to speak, and extending myself, trusting that the great mentor, the Spirit, is at work in their life. And so I just want to hit this. Randy, did you have a thought at all about that? Or
Yeah, I was going to say that with the whole theme of willing to love, would encourage us to also think about the willingness to bless others. And there's something about if you've been the recipient of a blessing, of a word, a hand on the shoulder, but somebody looking you in the eyes and saying good words to you, that can be a beautiful affirmation. And so in this kind of mentoring relationship, I would encourage you to practice giving a blessing to others. And what does it mean to even appropriately hold their shoulders, their head, whatever it might be, and just say good words to them? Whenever I see that done, it just seems like it has a way of just branding good things in people. So that's what comes to mind, Rob, as I hear you talk about the love part of it.
Right. Yeah. The and when you've been blessed and someone is in a good Jewish sort of blessing way, it's more than just words and information, isn't it? It kind of evokes something. This exercise here, preparing one's heart, this is something even one might ask oneself on the way to the coffee shop as by way of reminder, or from time to time, it's something that we may have to even just evaluate the nature of our helping others in these roles. Is the 5 questions, turning those 5 elements into a question. And so anyhow, that's I'll leave that there for us.
So as we transition from what does it take to be a spiritual mentor? Yeah, as we look at those 5 things, what's so important, I believe, is for us to look at where we're already doing this. If you're signed into this webinar, I'm sure you are doing those 5 things somewhere. And so if we're already doing these things, that really does begin to take the intimidation factor out of what it takes to be a spiritual mentor. And so as we move now into spiritual mentoring, what it is not, I'm just going to remind you, a few questions have come up, and I'm just going to make a quick aside. It was pretty impressive earlier. A question came up, and just as I clicked on it on the screen, Rob read it and seamlessly integrated it into what he was saying. And I know he wasn't going to originally talk about that, but it was rather impressive watching. I just want to say
Thank you.
it was quite impressive being here and being a part of that. So as we now go into some of the misconceptions and misunderstandings, once again, think about this from the other perspective as well. What maybe this could be what not to expect from your mentor as well. So spiritual mentoring, what it is not, or what not to expect from your mentor. We'll start with Randy on these.
Yeah, the first one that we want to toss your way to consider is, I'm here to remove your pain and struggles. So oftentimes there's if I'm going to say yes to being a spiritual mentor, I have to be ready to do that, and that's simply not the case. In fact, a spiritual mentor has the courage to enter the depths of one's pain and struggle, in order to help that person discover what learning might be there for them. So it's not an avoidance, it's actually inviting people into the pain and struggle. In fact, a spiritual mentor might say to themselves, now we're getting somewhere if we're getting to some of those places where people express a pain or a struggle. And my mentor, again, has a way of, I know that when I've shared something of a pain or something I'm wrestling with, he will physically sit up a little closer to me. And I know that, okay, I think he thinks we're getting somewhere with this. So the wise mentor also knows how to invite the person to wait and even camp out for a while in their pain and struggle. So it's not something for us to run out of, but maybe even something for us to run into. Now that requires us to then learn some good habits with spiritual mentoring.
Yeah, that's right.
And to not run when pains and struggles are shared. And one of the great things we can learn is the courage for us as spiritual mentors to say, Bob or Sally or whoever it might be, I don't know why this is happening, or I don't know why this has happened. But I want to be with you together as we continue to talk about this further. So it's hard for us to do at times, but not to get caught in the trap of thinking it's our job to try to remove the pain and the struggle. Actually, it's just the opposite, I think, to invite people into the pain and struggle.
Yeah, one of the challenging things too, Randy, with that is sorry if I interrupted you, but were you going or were you segueing?
No, you go.
Well, no, I mean, is sometimes I think when we are in pain and struggle, one of our first impulses is to want someone to do that for us. And so just because we're clear in our own mind and our own heart that we're simply going to be a companion and offer a listening presence and discernment and those things, that doesn't mean that necessarily we're on the same page at the beginning for what this kind of role of mentoring or being a friend is.
Yeah.
And so that's a tough one on both sides, So, yeah.
The second unhelpful mindset we would frame as, I'm here to solve your problems. Now, there is definitely a side to mentoring that we are very helpful in helping people solve problems, but it's not on the top of the job description, so to speak, for being a spiritual mentor. In fact, it may be that instead of helping you solve your problems, I'm here to wait with you as the Lord shows you what you are to do, or what you come to terms with yourself and what you're supposed to do with this problem that you presented. So for some of us who are answer people, spiritual mentoring can be a frustrating practice, if you will, because it's not that we are there primarily to give answers. That's the job of the Spirit. Remember, the Spirit is the one who's already at work guiding and leading and suggesting and all of that. We're there to help partner with the Spirit, not necessarily to give answers. But at the same time, we can be tremendously helpful in helping people solve their problems. So it's kind of a weird deal. We're not there primarily to solve problems, and yet at the end of the day, we might walk away from the relationship or the coffee time and say a prayer: Lord, thank you for using me to help Frank
Hmm.
deal with that issue that Frank was struggling with. So I hope you hear that, the
Yeah.
balance in that.
And I think, oh, go ahead, Brent.
I was just going to say, and so many times, what's unique about these two, how they kind of go together. I'm here to remove your pain and struggles. I'm here to solve your problems. Simply being that listening, loving, non-judgmental ear where people can share, often, you know, allows them to open the door to hear the Spirit within themselves. So just our presence, our loving presence among them, as we said earlier, that alone can help to solve their problems
Yeah.
and ease the pain.
Well, and sometimes the nature of those problems, I mean, it's we just need perspective, and that's what that gracious presence
Mm-hmm.
of someone in our lives has done. Is it just looks a little bit differently as a result of them being around. Um, but I mean, there are those times, and I mean, I feel it even as I at times will listen, that there's this subtle Rubik's cube sort of thing that is kind of going on, and I mean that there's a bit of a discipline to. This is not fundamentally, this person in front of me is not a problem to be solved or a project to be fixed. Um, and this person's a bit of a mystery. I think what often comes to mind too is I'll often, and I can remember this more when I worked at Biola and with college students, if I listened for an hour to somebody, I would have a good sense of the direction their journey kind of needed to take and what was going on. And so I would quickly, and maybe some of it was accurate and some of it was insightful. I'm not sure how gracious it always was, my thoughts, as I would think like that. But then I realized if I listened then to that same person for another 5 to 6 hours, I came to a spot where I'm like, Lord, be merciful. I have no idea what this person actually needs or what their some of the presumption of the first hour. So, and then I begin to really listen. And so there's always been kind of the discipline of, can I take that 6 hour approach to people to not presume some things? And so, uh, yeah, that comes to mind. So I guess it's more of a mindset than whether we're solving problems or not. It's a mindset of solving problems or fixing pain. The other mindset is one that's near and dear to my heart and the Loane family tree is I'm here to be a fountain of wisdom, insight, and advice. And it is not that there's anything wrong with wisdom, insight, and advice. The Lord has gifted us, and those are things we long for in our journey. I think it's the mindset that we're going to be a fountain of wisdom, insight, and advice, and we become a wisdom dispenser. Um, I know I used to get teased by college students that they would say something, and then, in a good listening way, you would reframe it. But I'd always reframe it, as they would say, in a deeper, different sort of language that was always kind of, truthfully, I think it was letting them know that I had some skill set or something, and so there is this need sometimes some of us in helping professions have to be seen a certain way, or even to see ourselves a certain way. And in fact, with all these mindsets, if we feel like, one, we can't remove their pain, we can't solve their problems, or we can't offer insight or wisdom, we may even shy away from being a presence in that person's life because we feel insecure that we're not able to do that. Well, that's the unhelpful mindset when we think like that. And somewhere along the way, someone gave me a little discipline, and this may not be for all of you, but for some of you that are in kind of the business of whether being a counselor, pastor, teacher, is every once in a while to have the discipline of fasting from insight. That I would kind of go through an afternoon of interactions with people, and I would, not letting them know this, but I would discipline myself to not always have a tidbit of wisdom or insight, or let's have you looked at it this way, um, and and the purpose being is just to begin to recognize how much of an autopilot and how much of my identity is hooked up in being uh, advice giver. And so I know in some of the community development works, a gentleman named Peter Block, in talking about this, he talks about advice-free zones. And we do a little bit of that even during the narrative time in stage 2 of the journey process, that sure, there's a good time for advice, but now's not it. And so that's that wisdom dispenser role can really be an unhelpful mindset for some folks, both in if you're looking for someone that's always doing that, but particularly if you're feeling the need to always play that role. There may be some prayerfulness and some sorting out that you need to do with your journey. So yeah, at one level or another, these mindsets really describe of an over responsibility that we sometimes take for people, that we feel like we're overly responsible, and so therefore kind of attached. It's one thing to be sad and feel sadness for another, but then to do it as if it's our own and it's us, where maybe we get a bit mixed up. So anyhow, that's my thought on that. That's my wisdom dispensing of the month.
I did not intend to cut him off by changing the slides, but maybe that just worked.
I thought he was making fun of the fact that I was wisdom dispensing about the unhelpful mindset of a wisdom dispenser.
I actually thought it was a great idea.
All right, what do we got next here?
Well, I really like the perspective of the mindset in dealing with those. It's not about being those things, because we may provide some of those. It's just about, is that the mindset we come into that mentorship relationship with. And so I appreciated that. So as we were planning and preparing this, some questions were filtering in a few weeks ago about some general topics, and so we came up with four of the frequently asked questions. We kind of grouped those together, and so we'll hit on these, and then we will hopefully have a little bit of time at the end to hit some of your questions that you've been posting. So once again, if you come up with a question, go ahead and post it in the question slot. We've been seeing some come through, and we may be able to address those later. So the first one: are there certain things I should be listening for along the way? Randy,
Yeah,
do you have something to say to that one?
Yeah, there's a few thoughts I'll share with you quickly. One thought would be who have been helpful or hurtful people along the way. So as you're listening to people, be listening for who have been helpful or hurtful people in their story. Another thing would be stories that they talk about that surface an unusual amount of emotion. So all of a sudden you notice they've really spiked in an anger or a happiness or a sadness, that sort of thing. Third would be stories that cause a person to light up. So when they start talking about certain things, certain people, certain situations, certain topics, they just their face lights up. A fourth would be stories of perceived successes or failures. That would be something to pay attention to when they share those stories that they perceive as success or failure. Another would be how they understand their relationship with God now, which is fascinating. It's so simple a question to ask. Tell me about your relationship with God right now, and to hear what they have to say. Another would be what seems to be defining them now. How do they understand who they are right now? Can give you a lot of free information. And then finally, this is a great question to ask, but it can surface many things. along the relationship. If you could wave your magic wand, what would you love to do? Or how would you make things different? Or how would you like to see things turn out? It's the magic wand question. Can be very helpful for other things that we should be listening for along the way.
I have yet to find this magic wand, but I've been asked about it a few times. What do we got here?
Thank you, Randy. Now, Rob, how do I invite the conversations to go deeper? So there have been a few questions that have popped up about, okay, how do you, if you have a friendship or a budding friendship, how do I approach maybe turning that from just friendship into maybe a spiritual mentorship? So
Yeah.
how do I help how do I help those conversations go even deeper?
It's someone who was pointed out to me even in this preparation for this a couple weeks ago, where she mentioned that she's played the role of a mentor at different times in someone she didn't know, and they got linked up, and the relationship went really well, and they were able to get to some deeper things surprisingly quickly. But in the situations in which she got linked up with someone to play the mentoring role, someone that she knew fairly well, she struggled with how to go deeper. And I often find that I think that this is one of those central challenges, inviting the conversations to go deeper. And I think a lot's been said, even Randy's last list of things there to pay attention to. I think, and then questions, I think often will invite us to go a bit deeper, a prayerfulness, both in the time as you're sitting there, Lord, may I be sensitive to that. But also, is there, as a mentor, am I praying for the mentoree or the friend if I'm walking alongside in such a way that I'm finding myself thinking about this often? I find that somehow connects with this. Um, One way is get to know their story a bit if you haven't done that in their life. That somewhere along the way you're going to want to have them unpack some of the chapters of their life, high points, low points, those sorts of things. And then also when I hear this question, I do want to add a dose of patience. That I think sometimes we want to microwave depth. And sure, there are those relationships, those kindred ones that come along and we seem like we've known them for years. Uh, Most relationships that are meaningful like that don't always happen like that. It takes some time and some shared experience of doing some things together and serving. And then to poke a little bit at the person who's asking the question, how do I invite the conversations to go deeper? Perhaps there's a frustration that they're feeling that I can't go deeper. How come we seem to skim along the surface here? I do think there's time in our lives to pay attention to perhaps I'm living superficially. Perhaps the reasons why the conversations don't go deeper might not just be about the other person across the table. That I need to, it's not always the case, but some of us need to have a kind of a come to Jesus moment. Like, are there places of resistance, Lord, where you're inviting me to go deeper? And some of the self honesty and vulnerability that are part of the relationship just naturally flow out of it. And so, but ultimately, it's about inviting questions and listening and listening together with the Spirit. So that's a gobbledygook of rushing through it, but some thoughts there.
I was going to say sometimes in those friendship relationships, we need to have a little bit more courage to ask some of those difficult questions as compared to somebody that we don't know. And that was some of the best words of encouragement that one of my mentors gave me is if there's a question that keeps resonating in your mind, if you are prayerfully in conversation with this person and a question keeps resonating in your mind, don't be afraid to ask that. It might be a tough question, but there's maybe a reason why that's coming up, and that's one way to get that to happen as well. Randy, what are some indications that the relationship is not working out, and how do I end the relationship?
And the first question there in that third one, I think we have to trust kind of what's going on inside of us ourselves too as we're meeting with someone. So I would say if you know that there's just a lack of chemistry going on, I mean, sometimes we get asked by people, will you be my mentor, whether it's spiritual mentoring or other types. And the more we get into it, we just know that for whatever reason, we can't think too hard about it. It just doesn't seem to be a chemistry there. I think at that point, and you got to do this carefully, but at that point, it's okay to be more honest with yourself and to try to draw closure to the relationship. Now, what often goes with the lack of chemistry is the lack of teachable spirit on the part of the person who asked you
Yeah.
if you'd mentor them. And so if you just know that there's this lack of teachable attitude, there's a resistance there, then that might lead to the third thing, which is a lack of engagement. So a great litmus test for this, are you working harder than the mentoree? Are you, and I think we know what that kind of means. If we're asking the questions and we find ourselves answering our own questions, or there's very little shared on the other end, or there's a resistance there, I think it behooves us at that point to be bold, which may take some prayer with that, but to be bold and honest and say, Jack, it could just be me, but I'm sensing that the relationship isn't really going where we thought it might be going. Are you sensing that too? And just put it back in the other person's lap to see what they say. And I've gotten more bolder with this myself to say, I think we might need to put a pause on our meeting together and see if we want to come at it a couple of months down the road. Would you be okay with that? And most of the time I found that the person is wanting uh, to give some space to come at it again or even to end the relationship. And with ending the relationship, I think what is always helpful is to begin by establishing some sort of a fence line, if you will. And by that I mean, are there certain logistical things that we can come to agreement on? Why we're meeting, how often we're going to meet, uh, how are we going to maintain confidentiality? Those sorts of things that might seem a bit cold or contractual. In the first couple of meetings, those are great things to put on the table, just so there's clarity there for both of you. And that as a part of that fence line or that list, I'm doing, if I may say so, a way better job at this than I used to, is to always setting an end date. So, Brian, I'd be willing to meet with you from now till Christmas, but at Christmas time, would you be okay if we just called the time out and asked, how's the relationship going? And do we need to continue, or has it been good and it will be good for us to end our formal meeting time in this type of mentoring relationship? So there's an out, so to speak, for yourself, and there's an out for the person you're mentoring, just in case, from their perspective, it's not going so well because of a not so good fit with you. So which could be a possibility as well.
Um, looking at the time, what Rob and I just quickly discussed as Randy was talking there, in regards to this, how do I find a mentor? What do I do when I cannot find a mentor? Be paying attention to the Vantage Point 3 blog, because we may have a blog entry on that soon, and that's maybe how we will tackle that. That how do I find a mentor? What do I do when I cannot find a mentor? So if we move on to question and answer time, what's been nice is some of the questions that have popped up, we've been able to refer to them. Randy and Rob, have been able to refer to them as we've been going through this. And so seeing that there's only a few minutes left before.
Yeah, we'll try to get to some of these. I get a list of all these questions, so it's good to see some of your questions there. One person asked about groups, and we were talking about one-on-one, but how about groups? And I think a lot of the same things we were talking about here are transferable. I think a great list of book here that does a great job of talking about the spiritual accompaniment is David Benner's book, Sacred Companions, The Gift of Spiritual Friendship and Direction. But I'll try to get back to each of you with some of these responses. Let me point this out here from a mentoring resources way. One of the things that, in more length, is this um, booklet mentoring guide that we've kind of put together for the different mentors in the Vantage Point 3 process, and um, we're pretty excited about that. And so we would highly recommend it. It has a way of getting very simply for someone that's walking with somebody else to think through the work. And we're thinking about the person for whom they've had some experience of being mentored, but we're also thinking about the person that doesn't really know what they're doing, and they perceive or a bit intimidated by it. This would be a great little help for you. And so I listed here at the bottom, it's page 66 of that mentoring guide, has the further resources of things that I think would just be helpful for you. So yeah, that's the mentoring resources there. So
Great. As we close here, once we're done and you exit, there'll be two just real quick questions. Please take the opportunity to answer those. It's really helpful to us as we plan these in the future to get some of that feedback. We really do appreciate that. But once again, to learn more about us at Vantage Point 3 and what we're all about and about our processes, we've been talking about the journey, way of life, things like that. You can either contact me, my email's right there. You can call our offices, check out the website, and also put on your calendar the next Vantage Point 3 webinar will be February 20th. Creating a culture of walking alongside-ness.
Our concern in this webinar will be a little bit more for those of you that are thinking about creating a culture, a mentoring culture, or a culture of spiritual companionship. Some of you in this, we're focusing mostly on the one-on-one or with a couple people sort of element. This next webinar, we want to focus upon getting some of that going. More from a cultural level within a church community, congregation, those sorts of things. So,
I'll remind you to pay close attention. That's AM. It's 10 to 11 AM. There was some confusion with today's, whether it was tonight or whether it was this morning. And so, but thank you very much for your time and for joining us. We're excited that you're a part of this, and we look forward to being in contact with you more in the future. But before we all sign off, Randy, would you mind closing us with a prayer?
Yeah, I would, just before I do that, would invite you all to, many of you know who we are, and we've been in relationship for some time. As you have insights on mentoring that you think would be helpful for us to go over at some point, or we might invite you to be a part of this sort of thing, we'd love to hear from you in that regard as well. So, Lord, we are grateful for the way that you have mentored us in our journey with you, and we're grateful for the people you have nudged to notice us, and we pray that we would have hearts and eyes to notice those in our communities whom you are inviting us to walk alongside. And so we pray that we would be mindful of that as we head into tomorrow and the weekend and whatnot. We pray that you would use us for your good work. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
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 Good to be together, even from a distance here.
Yep. Bless you all.
Yes. We did record this, so just to let you know that it will be posted up here tomorrow or the next day on our website, and you'll get some communication about that as well. So blessings to you each in your communities.
Thank you for joining us.